Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cozy Corner. My name is Lee and this is my library. So grab a mug of something yummy and settle in for some talk of books. Today you're actually going to get a 2-for-1 because I decided to include my March wrap-up with my April TBR because, to be quite honest with you, I had an abysmal reading month in March. I work a job in ministry and Easter is right around the corner. I'm posting this on April 1st, so literally in 4 days it will be Easter. So March was consumed with a lot of prep for that, but also with Book March Madness, organizing that competition and all the videos and book updates and bracket updates has kind of consumed all of the time that I would normally spend reading. So I only managed to finish 4 books in the month of March. I actually only finished the last 2 on March 30th, right under the gun. But technically I have opened and started 6 books in the month of March, but I only count the ones that I have finished, obviously. So right now at the beginning of this video, I'm going to walk you through my review of the 4 books that I finished in the month of March, and then we will get into my TBR for April. So the first book I finished in March is The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood. This one is part of my Around the World in 325 Days reading challenge for the months of February and March. We were exploring the continent of North America, and this happened to be the book for Canada. It does take place in the Toronto area of Canada, particularly in the township is called Ticonderoga, where the main character grew up. This follows the story of Iris Chase, who is the main narrator of this story. And this story starts out with her sister Laura having committed suicide. There are a few trigger warnings in here, suicide being one of them. But Iris' sister Laura has just committed suicide, and that's sort of the main climax part that we're dropped right into the middle of. This book was so exceptionally written. I would expect nothing less from Margaret Atwood. But what impressed me more is that there are technically 4 different timelines that are happening all about Iris and her sister Laura, but there are 4 different timelines starting at different places in this particular story. So the main one we get is Iris at around 80-ish years old. That's the main narrator of the story, and it's talking about her life as an older woman and decades later the aftermath of this situation that she and her sister found themselves in. And she is telling the second timeline, which is the story of her and Laura as little children, growing up through all of these events to the point where Laura commits suicide. So from when they were children to that point. The third timeline is a bunch of newspaper articles and like society pages that detail like deaths in the Chase family, society outings, scandals, that kind of thing. So that's another sort of public timeline. And then the 4th timeline is probably the weirdest part of this book, but it's so good. It's a science fiction story called The Blind Assassin. And it is an anonymous story of a nameless man and woman, or boy and girl. They grow up as the story goes on. They are anonymous, you don't know the names, but all of these stories intertwine to reveal secrets and hidden truths about Iris and her sister Laura. I loved the fact that there never really was a big aha plot twist moment. It really was a sort of momentum of slow revealing of things, and you're led to the truth. I technically did call both of the plot twists in here. The first one I called pretty early on, involving Iris, and then the second one involving Laura, I did not call. I got there before it was revealed, but I was definitely more in the dark about that one than I was about Iris, but it was still an excellent reveal. I think the writing in here is exquisite. She has such an exquisite balance of very detailed, beautiful imagery, while enough realistic language in there to balance each other out. One of my biggest pet peeves in writing is when there's so much flowery writing in here that I can't really put myself down solidly anywhere in the story. I love Iris as a character. I think she's probably one of my favorite female lead characters that I've ever read, because we get to see her at different points in her life. And we get to witness her commentary on a lot of different things. I particularly loved her as an older woman. I think she was so just, there's something so dry, darkly funny about an older person who's just done with like the parameters of life and the rules we live by. They're just like, why? Why do I do this? But she's also got kind of a fighting spirit that was driven out of her in this book, and I really liked to see that. I think I did give it 4 out of 5 stars. I think the only reason why I didn't give it 5 out of 5 stars is because I'm not entirely sure whether I would read this again, mostly because it's a big time commitment, at least for me. Someone else may whiz through it, but juggling the multiple timelines was a lot. I really had to concentrate when I was reading it. It was well worth the effort, but it's a story where I don't know if I would pick this up and want to read it again just for the fun and enjoyment of it. I will definitely be keeping this book 100%, but that's really the only thing that kept me from giving it the 5 out of 5. If I want to reread it again, that's usually the cap, but this is 4 out of 5 stars, which means that everybody needs to read this book. Can't wait to read more of Margaret Atwood. She's, I think, such an icon. I also really want to take her masterclass. That's on my to-do list this year. The next book I finished in March is Like Water for Chocolate by Laura Esquivel. This book, I think, was probably the first ever dose of magical realism, where that would be what I would classify it as. This follows the story of Tita, who is the youngest daughter in her family, and Mama Elena, who is her mother, demands, because it is tradition, that Tita cannot marry because the youngest daughter in this particular family line stays and grows old with the mother and takes care of her as she gets older. And Tita doesn't want any of it because she has fallen in love with a man. And Mama Elena does not like this, and so she forces Tita's love to marry her oldest sister. And Tita is forced to witness them getting married, and basically has to live her life as her mother's indentured servant, and witness her life that she could have had with the man she loved go by with her older sister. There are a lot of other side stories that happen in here regarding like the other kitchen servants that are in the house, her middle sister, the man she almost marries. That's a little bit of a spoiler, but not really. So there's a lot of other side stories that happen here, but the main thing that happens is that Tita loves cooking. Her home, her world is the kitchen. And that's not in a derogatory sense, but she just was taught about the beauty and the magic of cooking. And I say magic because that's what happens. Tita's emotions are so strong that they bleed out into her cooking. And some of the meals she makes affect the people who eat them. And it's really funny too, or sad, or poignant, watching these people eat their meals and experience the emotion that translates from Tita to her cooking. And that's the part that gives it the magical realism. That the magic isn't necessarily explained. You just sort of come to understand that the emotion that Tita feels is so powerful that it translates through her cooking. There's a lot of Mexican tradition. This is also part of my Around the World in 325 Days challenge for the country of Mexico. It also talks about the Mexican Revolution in here, a little bit of a historical dose. Oh, I forgot to say, The Blind Assassin takes place during the Great Depression and World War II, around that era, right before World War II, just as things sort of start getting going. Anyway, this takes place with the Mexican Revolution, so there's a little bit of that in there. I also really love this book because it's chronological, so like every chapter is a month, and with every chapter comes a recipe. And so literally the head of each chapter says preparation, and while the events in the chapter have to do with the drama that's happening in Tita's life, it also is set around her having to make this particular dish. And so you get the grocery list and like the preparation of how these dishes are made. I think I gave this one, I want to say 3 out of 5 stars, or 3.5. I can't exactly remember my official one. I'll put it down here at the bottom of the video, and it'll also be in the description. I don't know exactly how to communicate this because I am someone who reads a lot of fantasy, but the way that magic is depicted in here, to me, just didn't work for me. But 3 out of 5 stars means that everyone should read this book. It's a good book that people should read. It's a beautiful story, very painful, very powerful. I also didn't like the fact that how some of the relationships came about in this book and some of the relationships that were left behind. So again, I liked it. I enjoyed reading it. It was a quick read, but ultimately not one of my favorites. I don't know if I'll keep it at the end of the year. We'll have to see. Wait for my big haul video at the end of the year. But it was very good. I thought it was an incredibly creative delivery of this story with the chronological feel, and very unique. I've never read anything like it. So the next book I read in the month of March is the 6th installment of the Brother Band Chronicles, and that is The Ghostfaces by John Flanagan. If you need a reminder, the Brother Band Chronicles is the first spin-off of his very accomplished Ranger's Apprentice series. It is one of my all-time favorites. It's currently sitting on my favorites shelf. I love the Brother Band Chronicles. I love the Scandian people. I think they are probably my favorite people group, and I'm fairly certain that I am in love with Eric, who is the Oberjarl, or like their equivalent of the king. I love him so much. John Flanagan did an exquisite job in creating Eric. He's hilarious, like over dramatic when he needs to be, very serious, very smart. It's like all the combinations in one big hulking, massive, muscular, bearded man. Anyway, I could talk about him forever. But this particular story obviously follows Hal, who is the captain of the Heron, which is the ship, and his brother band crewmates, as they encounter this massive storm and are blown by the storm into uncharted waters and come across this land peopled by the Mawagansett tribe. And they soon discover, while they're waiting for the season to change so the wind will change direction so they can get back home to Scandia, they discover that the Mawagansett tribe are being attacked by another native group called the Ghostfaces. And the Ghostfaces are fairly ruthless. They will go through and burn down settlements and kill people and steal things, and it's pretty much a blight on all the other people groups who live on this particular land. And so it's just the story of them getting blown around by this storm, meeting the people, helping them fight this mini battle, and then head back home. So I did give this one 4 out of 5 stars. Normally the Brother Band Chronicles are either 4 out of 5 or 5 out of 5. The reason why it's not a full 5 out of 5 is just because it's not my favorite of the series. It was still really good, but it's hard to beat that first trilogy. I think I have 2 more left in my TBR. I'm currently reading 1, and I have 1 more on my TBR shelf. But I loved that first trilogy so much, particularly the first book. I can't really say that about actually a lot of series where the first book is my favorite, but I think the first book of the Brother Band Chronicles is my absolute favorite. They're all just so cute. I don't know what it is about a bunch of misfits coming together and finding a family. It's just so cute. But this story is really good, but it's just not my favorite of the series. This is the first time I've ever actually seen John Flanagan address this in his book, but it's very obvious if you read Ranger's Apprentice or Brother Band that he bases his world very loosely, but still based on countries and people groups in the actual world. It's very easy to draw, comparisons, but this is the first time where he has ever actually addressed that, and because this is about what we would consider to be in America Native American or Indigenous people. He does live in Australia, so I'm assuming it probably comes from that, or whether he's basing it on Native Americans or Indigenous people. This is the first time he's ever mentioned anything about it, and he was very honest about the fact that in this particular instance, he tried his best to remain as culturally neutral as possible because he understands that there is so much identity and culture within that particular people group, the sub-people groups, that he did his best to remain respectful, and he also took the time to, if there was anything he got incorrect, that he apologizes for his ignorance on that front. He did his best to research. That was the first time I've ever seen him do that, and it really impressed me, because there's a whole thing in this particular story where they talk about Hal takes extensive notes, travel logs, and star mapping, as part of, the exploratory nature of the Scandians, and he refuses to map any of his journey to the land where the Mawagansett people live, because they mention in here a not-so-subtle elbow jab to colonists, saying, if we let people know that we're here, they're only going to come and mine this land for whatever resources. And I'm like, oh, doesn't that sound familiar? So I really liked that he made a point to talk about what it would have been like had that not happened in the first place, and a nod to the fact that he is writing from a position of ignorance if he did get anything wrong. I was impressed by that. A few good things. I really liked the character development in this particular book. Stig, who is Hal's first mate, experiences love. He falls in love for the first time with a member of the Mawagansett tribe. Tecumseh is her name, and they fall in love, and the events surrounding that relationship really bring out some huge character development in Stig. I think he is probably the one, Stig, that has had the best character arc in this particular story, because he grew up, his father had abandoned him and his mom, and he had a lot of anger issues. And through becoming friends with Hal and joining this brother band and being given a position of command and being respected by his peers and loved by his peers, it has really brought him through an arc of development. And this just gave him another depth of character, this relationship. I loved it a lot. And it was nice after the events of this story happened to watch how that affected the brother band. That probably, I think, was probably my favorite part of this. The other thing I really like about this particular book is Kloof. I think all of the main characters in his series have an animal that is assigned to the main character, and they're just so adorable and make such an iconic addition to the story. And Kloof, who is Hal's dog, is no exception to this rule. She actually made her debut in the book before this, but I didn't do a wrap-up on that book. But she's this massive mountain dog that Hal found in the woods, and they met each other and immediately became friends, best buddies, which is my favorite. And she is now a dog on their ship and is huge and is this massive war animal, but the cutest thing you'll ever see, and she chews everything with reckless abandon. Yeah, I just love this series so much, and I can't wait to read the next two. These books are laugh out loud funny. There are moments in here with just the dry, acerbic humor of the Scandian people that just get me laughing like no one else will. I love them so much. I can't really put a foot wrong. The series can't really put a foot wrong. It really just comes down to what are my favorites in this series and whether I will reread them again. So. And the last book I read in the month of March is The Book of Night Women by Marlon James. This again is part of my Around the World in 325 Days challenge for Jamaica. This book was hard work because it follows the story of Lilith, who is a plantation-born slave, and it is all about her becoming involved with the Night Women, which is a group of 6 women who are on the Mount Pelier estate, who have been plotting a rebellion with several other groups of women all around Jamaica. A women-led rebellion, that's an important part of this book, and they recognize something in Lilith based upon the African and native magic that they practice, that they recognize something in her that is beneficial to their movement, but she doesn't want anything to do with it. And this is obviously a slavery-based story. It is not nice to read. It is very hard to read, very emotionally draining, as most material based around this is. I would encourage people to still read it because I think sometimes in America we tend to remember or think that slavery was just a here thing in America, but it's literally everywhere. Everywhere that was colonized had something along the lines of this happen. And educating yourself on the history of these countries and understanding the role that white people played in the subjugation and enslavement of other people groups is important, so that we learn from the past in order to affect the future and make sure that nothing like this ever happens again, to the best of our ability. So this content is hard, but it's an important story to read about. I think this was beautifully written. I have never read a novel in this format where it is told from an anonymous narrator, also with dialect. So it is spoken through someone whose English is not their first language. And so it is affected by being a non-native English speaker, also a Jamaican accent. It heavily affects in here. It takes a while to get used to that. There are no quotation marks in here. Every time there is a bit of dialogue, it is broken up by dashes, and the narrator interjects the commentary in here So it takes a little getting used to, but once you get used to it, it flows so beautifully. It's so devastating. And the reason why I think I really liked it is because I read a few books in college by Atwood, who Marlon James is compared to, or, you know, lauded with. I love his writing, awful, heartbreaking stuff to read, but it's an incredible story. It's a story that really, I think, challenges you to sit and contemplate the moral and theological implications or the damage that it did to these people. It's hard. You will be conflicted. There's a romance story in here that happens where one minute you will feel like that's the cutest thing that's ever happened, and then you almost hate yourself for thinking that because of the awful things that are happening within that relationship, but also outside on the plantation and in Jamaica and the world in general. So many conflicting emotions were running through me. I did give this book 3.5 out of 5 stars. I was gonna give it 4 out of 5 stars for the same reason that I did with Blind Assassin. I loved the book. I think everyone should read this, with a star next to it. But I don't think I could read this again. This subject matter, once I've read it, I have no desire to ever read it again. It's heartbreaking and very hard to read, and the emotional turmoil. Maybe if I am in the mood to read it again, but I've read it once and that was more than enough for me. I would have given it 4 out of 5 stars for that reason, but I gave it 3.5 because of the language used in here. I'm not necessarily talking about derogatory and slur words used for people groups. Obviously that's hard to read and not at all nice or accepted, but there was a lot of crude and, what's the word I'm looking for, foul language used in this book. I'm not necessarily a prude, nor am I particularly sensitive to that kind of thing. I can handle a lot, but it was on every page and it was very graphic, and after a while it was just getting to be a lot, and so I feel like I need to warn people that while the subject matter is difficult in itself, the language I think might take some getting used to. This is not, I would actually probably say, don't let a teenager or younger read this. The material is hard enough, but the language, I think no one that young needs to be exposed to that. That's my own opinion. You can completely disagree with me, and that's fine. But that's why I did give it 3.5 out of 5 stars. But this was an exceptional book. I have another one that I'm in the middle of reading that also deals with colonization and slavery around the American Revolution. The history of Jamaica and the slave rebellions mentioned in this book that had happened over several decades. It was fascinating and horrible to learn about how long this particular history had lasted. So I'm glad that I got to see this depiction of what it must have been like. I will never know what it was actually like, but it was a privilege to be able to step into a history. I will always be grateful for that, any education opportunity given to me along that front. So that was my March wrap-up. Hopefully that wasn't too long. Now we're going to move on to my April TBR. I have a few sort of summaries to give you. So I have one book that I'm trying to finish for my personal, no, sorry, 2 books that I'm trying to finish for my personal TBR, and that's the remaining 2 of the Brother Band Chronicles that I set out to read in January or February, and I never finished. So I'm hoping to finish those, and then I have 2 books left on my Around the World in 325 Days challenge, which technically doesn't end until April 13th when the next one comes out, and that is for the Dominican Republic with The Brief and Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, and for the Bahamas with Wind from the Carolinas. I'm really excited for those. I've already started both of them, and I think they're going to go really well. I'm excited to read them. So that's happening behind the scenes, and we'll talk about that in my April wrap-up. But I want to highlight the Elite 8. I said in my Book March Madness introduction video, as well as the website and on my social media, all that information will be down in the description, that once we got to the Elite 8 in the competition, that those 8 books would become my TBR for April, or become part of my TBR for April. So I wanted to walk you through those books and highlight the titles for you in case you want to join me in celebrating so far the books that are winning Book March Madness. First up, we're going to start with the two that are in the romance bracket. I don't have one of them. I went hunting in the library today, and the only one they didn't have was In 5 Years by Rebecca Searle, which is the rookie release in that particular bracket. But I do have the champion, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. You can't really tell, it's right there on the spine. This is my grandma's copy. I did take this to college with me for one of my lit classes. Oh, look. What is this? Oh, please say there's something written on it. What do you know? Whenever I was bored in lit class, I would doodle. Oh, man. Oh, I love when that happens. It's like finding 20 bucks in your winter coat. Okay, sorry, a little time capsule moment. This is my grandma's copy of Pride and Prejudice. I did take this to college with me. I love how old it is, I think it's so interesting that the pages aren't yellow, they're almost rosy, like a rosy pink. I don't know if it translates on camera, but the edges are sprayed, what I'm assuming would have been a pretty sort of desert rose color, and it smells so good. I'm really excited to read this one again. I've read it so many times, but I'm really excited. It's one of my favorites. Sense and Sensibility, actually, I think is probably my favorite Austen. I think it's, my opinion, her best. That might be controversial, but it's not in the competition. Pride and Prejudice is. I don't need to explain to you the plot of this one. It's really well known. So for fantasy sci-fi, the champion book for that bracket is The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is obviously the first installment of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I have never read these, ever. I technically haven't read The Hobbit either. I listened to a kid's audiobook version of it. Those exist. And I can't say that I've always wanted to read these, but now that I'm presented with the opportunity to read it, I'm excited because I love C.S. Lewis so much, and he was good buddies with Tolkien, and I know that there are a lot of people who really love it, and the incredible amount of world building that happens in the books. I love the movies, so I'm excited to read the book. And then the rookie release for the fantasy sci-fi bracket, I actually started today after I checked it out from the library. That is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I am on page 43 or chapter 3. This, again, I don't really need to explain it. It's all the rage on BookTube right now, or was for a while. I like Alex so far as a character. I like the fact that this is an adult fantasy novel. And I like the concept of it, that there are secret societies all based on magical concepts, or like various studies of magical arts. And I just got introduced to Daniel Arlington, or Darlington, which I think is such an iconic name. Honestly, doesn't Darlington sound like something that belongs in an Austen novel? I think that's a cute hybrid of a name. So I'm interested so far. I love Leigh Bardugo. Her Six of Crows duology is currently on my shelves. I'm ecstatic for the TV show. So excited for that. And so far, oh, I just noticed that there's a green iridescent sheen on the snake. Cool. It does take a little bit of a concerted effort to sort of concentrate on what's happening. And we're definitely dropped in the middle of the action, so it's going to be a jumbled up timeline, which I'm already used to because of Blind Assassin, so here we go. So the rookie release for the classics bracket is The Help by Kathryn Stockett. Again, I feel like I don't really need to explain the plot of this book. It's a well-known enough story by now. Again, I have seen the movie. I actually watched this movie on a plane flight from, I want to say, it was Vancouver to Sydney, Australia on my way to New Zealand to visit family. And that was the first time I ever watched the movie, and it wrecked me. The poor businessman next to me must have thought I was insane at how hard I was crying. But I am excited to read the book because I've heard that it's very different from the movie. But I also know that it got a lot of really good reviews. People like this one. So I'm excited to read this one. And then the champion for the classics bracket is, of course, the participant-voted title, Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Again, I've got all these in my public library. I'm really impressed that they had all of them. I love it. It has a ribbon. I love when books have ribbons, and it's so silky, and these pages are huge. And it has illustrations. Cool. Oh, and gold shiny gilded edges. So there you go. I had a conversation with my librarian saying that this is the illustrated children's library. This book is massive and it's in early readers section of the library. she's like, this is one of those ones where I don't agree with the library classification of this. I don't know why it's in children's lit, because this thing is massive and hard to read. But at least for kids. But I am excited. I've never read the book for this either. I've seen all the movies, but I have never read this book, so I'm excited to dip my toes into the Book of the March Women. And then finally we have the 2 titles in the mystery thriller bracket. This one for the champion title is The Girl on the Train by Paula Hawkins. The amount of people who are split down the middle about this book. People think that it's either really, really good, that it's incredibly plot twisty, but other people are like, why did this book get as far in the competition as it did? It beat out so many titles that it shouldn't have beaten. So I am curious about this one. I don't read a whole lot of mystery thrillers. This follows the story of a girl named Rachel, and she's riding a train and she witnesses something and goes to the police and is caught up in, obviously, the events surrounding the thing she witnessed. That's all I know. I purposefully kept myself apart from any spoilers on this book. I know this was also made into a movie with the iconic Emily Blunt. We love her. So I am excited to read this one and to see whether it actually is plot twisty. I have a feeling, and maybe this is why I don't read a whole lot of mystery thrillers, because I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I am someone who I think is very capable of predicting how things are going to turn out. Not necessarily how they will arrive to that point, but I can sort of predict fairly accurately what will happen at the end of the book. And so maybe I just don't want to read a whole bunch of books and be disappointed about the fact that I'm never really surprised. It takes a lot to blow my mind with books. So I'm excited to see if this one holds up. And then the last book on my quote-unquote official TBR for the month of April is Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. I'm really excited for this one. I've always wanted to read a Ruth Ware book. People say she's excellent. She is, you know, heralded as one of the new greats. I believe this has something to do with a smart home. And this woman, I think, finds herself in possession of one or gets to be in one. I can't exactly remember. But then the smart home turns against her. It reminds me of, what's that one Disney Channel original movie, Smart House? Is that what it was? Oh, that movie was so weird. Anyway, this one sounds really interesting. I think the element of technology in a mystery thriller is really interesting, so excited to read this one. Like I said earlier, there'll be a few other videos throughout the month of April that highlight, I think, 2 other sort of book curated reading lists that I'm going to be participating in, but they'll have separate videos later in the month. But for now, those are all the books that I'm planning on reading during the month of April. If you have read any of these books and want to offer any reviews, or if you've read any of the books that I read in March and have any reviews, I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions. Comment them down below. If you have been following along with Book March Madness and you like the fact that these books are included or don't like the fact that they're included, let me know down below. Basically just, you know, join me in conversations about any and all of these titles. I would love to have those conversations with you. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a like and subscribe to my BookTube channel. It really does help me out and let me know what you guys want to see. As always, a huge thank you to the friends and family who have readily supported me along this journey. It truly means the world to me, and I can't wait to see what's on the next page. Cheers.